Hi, and welcome to Cockatoo, A12, the audio version of our episode on infectious disease in parrots. You will be listening to Dr. Jeffrey Jenkins of the Avian and Exotic Animal Hospital describe various diseases that affect your parrot.
Science knowledge only adds to the excitement, the mystery, and the awe of a flower.
Evidence is evidence. It's public. Everybody can look at the evidence and assess it, and eventually, if there's enough evidence, come to the same conclusion.
Cockatoos with attitude. Cockatoo.
So we'll talk a little bit about infectious diseases. The incidence of infectious disease in parrots really disappeared with the end of importation. So when I started as a exotic animal avian veterinarian in the early 1980s, we probably saw more infectious disease than anything else, second only to maybe nutritional problems. Today, infectious disease is a very small percentage of the diseases that we see, and we see primarily nutritional and husbandry problems, and then just metabolic things, old age, arthritis, a lot of things that are related to the paradigm of bird ownership. The common infectious diseases in parrots, perhaps the most notorious is Psittacosis. That's the chlamydial disease that causes the disease that's called parrot fever in people. Once very common, I would say that we'd see 40, 50 cases a year. Now we probably only see 4 or 5 cases a year. So down by a factor of 10. Polyomavirus, a disease that had a huge explosion in the late 1980s, caused significant damage to the bird breeding industry and the pet bird trade, the pet shops and bird shops, because polyoma would go through and kill every baby bird in a pet shop. Psittacosis virus, which is a herpes viral hepatitis of birds, which some birds are chronic carriers, just like herpes viruses in lots of species, including people, but can cause very acute disease. So a bird can be exposed to a bird who's a chronic carrier, get sick and die in less than a week. Cloaca Papilloma Disease, which is another herpes virus disease that causes a warty-like growth in the cloaca of birds. Still a big problem in especially South American birds, Amazons and macaws, and can lead to other diseases like bile duct carcinoma or pancreatic carcinoma. West Nile virus, which only recently came to the United States. I don't know the exact year off the top of my head, but is spread by biting insects. We do see some of the viral encephalitides. Those are primarily horse and wild bird diseases, but if they get into parrots, can kill your parrots. Proventricular dilatation disease, or what today is being called avian bornoviral disease, which we found in the early 1980s, but only found the virus that caused it in the last 4 or 5 years. Beacon feather disease, which is caused by the circovirus, another disease that really devastated the bird trade for years and years. Took us a long time to find the virus, and now is rare because we've done such a good job testing for it.
We hope you will consider supporting us on Patreon today. This is how it works. We produce up to 2 videos a month. As a patron, you pledge to give us a donation, whatever you feel is right and meets your budget. And Patreon gives us your gift monthly. You can easily set a limit on how much you donate a month. You can change the amount of your pledge at any time. Your gift will allow us to continue bringing you entertaining and informative videos. Some of our planned videos are home exams, how to do a home exam quickly, efficiently, and properly. Early detection saves lives. A new paradigm, what it means to be a parrot owner. An interview with Dr. Jeffrey Jenkins of the Avian and Exotic Animal Hospital. Who is training whom? Behavior training and how to empower your bird to make good choices in our world. Patreon.com/Chloe Sanctuary. We look forward to your participation in Cockatoo.
So let's go over those quick. Probably the most important one is still psittacosis. Psittacosis is a disease of parrots that's caused by chlamydia. The trick of chlamydia, which is a parasitic bacteria. So it's a bacteria that can't grow on the countertop, it can't grow on your skin, it has to grow inside a cell. And in order to replicate itself, chlamydia, like any good parasite, does its best not to kill its host. It wants to drag that out. So lots of different species of animals have chlamydial diseases. As humans, we have two. We have a venereal chlamydial disease that causes damage to our reproductive tract, and we have a respiratory chlamydia that at least initially causes respiratory disease, causes damage to the respiratory system, and then hides in other tissues. And just as a little aside, may turn out to be a major player in atherosclerosis, heart disease, and strokes in people. And it may turn out that your lifestyle is only part of that disease, and the other part is having had the chlamydial disease for most of your life. So it's an interesting disease. The parrot's chlamydia is most often transmitted vertically. It comes from the parents, goes to the chicks. It may be that they're born with it. It may be that they get it from their mom while their mom's feeding them. It's a systemic disease, but it likes to live in their liver tissue. So this organism gets in there and replicates if in acute infection. So if a bird gets it and it's never had it before, sometimes they will actually get sick. Just like if you catch the venereal chlamydial disease of people, after you get it, you have a period of time where you might have symptoms of that disease, but then those symptoms go away. So if the parrot survives the initial disease, then that organism becomes gets into its routine, and it lives in its liver, and over a long period of time, anywhere from 5 to 20 years, it destroys that bird's liver. And intermittently, as that organism goes through its life cycle, that organism's shed into the bird's feces, and so other birds get it from being exposed to the droppings, either fresh or even dried, of other birds who have the disease, and people who catch it, the same thing. There are different strains of chlamydia, and we found over the years that when a parrot gets a different species chlamydia, sometimes the disease is much worse. So if a parrot gets the chicken strains of chlamydia or some other things, then they're probably more likely to actually get sick and die from them than if they get the diseases that have become habituated in parrot species. So if they get the disease from their mom, they're probably not as likely to have overt clinical signs. Well, what are those signs? Well, if your bird gets chlamydia, he may have no signs at all. He may look perfectly normal, and that's one of the reasons why we go looking for that in birds who are going to, come to a boarding facility or go to a new home. It's commonly one of the tests that avian veterinarians do when you adopt a new bird or purchase a new bird. Part of the reason that we check for it, quite honestly, is also liability. Because if we don't check your bird and then you catch psittacosis from the bird and you get sick, and some people actually die from it, then there's a level of liability to the bird veterinarian. So that is admittedly one of the reasons we twist your arm to do it, but it's also that's still a good reason to check your bird to have it. And you want to find out that he has it before somebody in your house gets sick. You want to find out if he has it before other birds you might own get sick from him. And if you're a bird boarding facility or a bird hospital, we want to find out that he's got it before Another bird catches it, a staff member in the hospital catches it. So there's lots of different reasons that's a very important disease for us. The birds who have the acute form of the disease act sick. They have what we would describe as sick bird signs. They're fluffed up, they get dehydrated, they lose weight, they have diarrhea. It damages their liver, so you see bile pigments in both their feces and their urine. So their urine has that kind of chartreuse yellow, chartreuse green color to it if they have the acute disease. And if they're not treated, they get worse. They can have diarrhea, they can vomit because their liver's not working right, and they can progress to the point where they die. Birds who have the more chronic form of the disease typically have chronic liver damage, and their liver gets scar tissue, and they develop sclerosis, like a person who has some chronic liver damage like alcoholism or chronic active hepatitis or one of the herpes viral hepatitis. Oftentimes they end up with sclerosis, and then you end up with a liver that's more scar tissue than functional liver, and you die of liver failure. So those are typically birds who are later in life. They're 10 years old, 15 years old, and they're dying of liver failure. Those birds, we can cure their chlamydia, we can cure their psittacosis, we can't fix their livers. So we want to find them before they're dying from that stuff as well. People who get the disease, it's worth talking about, get symptoms that are very similar to the flu. Malaise, which means you just feel crappy, aches and pains, you feel sick. Chills, you run a fever with it. Oftentimes people get very high temperatures where they're running temperatures up in 104, 105, 106. And the thing about if you have chlamydia is that your symptoms don't go away. So if you have the flu, you're really sick like that for maybe 4, 5, 6 days, but then you start getting better. If you have chlamydia, those symptoms just keep on carrying on. So you continue to have your fever, you continue to have that feeling of malaise. People can be damaged by high temperatures, and they can have their liver damaged, and some people actually do die from chlamydia if it's not caught. Typically, if your physician knows you own parrots, knows you own birds, they're going to catch that and treat you, and once treated, it's pretty easy to treat. I've personally had chlamydia twice, or psittacosis twice. Caught it once from a great horned owl while I was a vet student. I thought I had the flu. It was Christmas time. I was supposed to leave vet school for the weekend, go home for the Christmas holiday, and I happened to meet a pathologist in the hallway, a famous pathologist, and he goes, "Oh, Jeff, did you hear about your owl that you sent me?" So I'd had an owl that I'd been working on in the Raptor Rehab Center that was sick, and he died. It was wintertime. It wasn't too surprising. I'd sent him to pathology for them to figure out what was wrong with him. And it turns out that he had ornithosis, the non-parrot form of psittacosis. And so when he told me that this bird had died of chlamydia, the light went on in my head, and I realized, I didn't have the flu, I had psittacosis. So as soon as I got home for the Christmas holiday, I went to my physician. They did tests on me, put me on medicine, and in literally 48 hours I was in a bed. It was nice. Also caught it from parrots in the early 80s that were being imported and coming through the quarantine system. And I have never had it since, and I think that probably having had it twice, I'm now immune. I don't think I'm going to catch it again. But in people, it's easy to treat. It only takes 7 to 10 days of medication, depending on what they put you on, to cure people with it. Getting rid of it in your bird is much more challenging. To treat it in your bird, we treat it for 45 days, basically, or 7 weeks. We have to keep the bird on it till the cells that these organisms are hiding in go through their life cycle, and they die with the chlamydia dies along with those cells. Because otherwise, we have a very hard time getting the drug to where the organism is and clean it out of your bird. So a long process. We treat it in 2 ways, either oral medicine once a day for 7 weeks, or an injectable form of the same medicine that comes out of Europe called Vibravenous. It's doxycycline. And the nice thing about that is they only get a single injection a week, pretty much once a week for 7 weeks. And a lot of people choose to do that, although it is more expensive. But having to put medicine in your bird every day for 7 weeks versus a shot once a week for 7 weeks, a lot easier.
If you are enjoying our videos, we hope that you can find it in your heart to support our work. It costs between $25,000 to $30,000 a year to care for our flock of heartbroken and abused birds. Most of our birds came with feather destructive disorder. Even a basic exam with blood work costs $300. Medical emergencies cost us thousands a year. We are a non-profit, and donations are tax-deductible to the full extent of the law. We need your support. Birds deserve a happy and healthy life. Become our patron at www.patreon.com/Chloe Sanctuary to support us on a per-video basis, or donate at our webpage today.
The second disease we probably ought to talk about is probably Polyomavirus, because it's probably been the most devastating. Polyomavirus was originally found in budgerigars and big breeding farms with budgies. And a lot of these birds died as babies, and they were called crawlers. A lot of these birds didn't feather out right. But some of them kind of got over it and survived. We found out only later that a lot of these, and we called that disease in budgies French Molt. So French Molt was primarily Polyomavirus, although some of these birds had both Polyomavirus and beak and feather disease. When that disease got into the other species of parrots, it was much more devastating, and especially to babies. So adult birds oftentimes didn't die from it and would even become long-term carriers, but chicks from those birds, or chicks exposed to the disease prior to the time that they weaned, around the time of weaning, had this cataclysmic hemorrhagic disease where their blood vessels would basically just decompose, and every place you touch them, they'd form a bruise, and they literally would bleed out, and it was just horrid. And would go through the aviaries the nurseries in aviaries or in pet shops and kill every bird in the pet shop or every bird in the aviary. Truly, truly frightening disease. You have a bird come into the hospital because a lot of these birds would show kind of sick bird signs. They'd stop eating, stop passing stool well, be hunched up and sleepy and look like they were miserable. And then literally hours later, they would be bleeding from their skin, they'd be bleeding from their eyes and their noses, and they'd be dead in hours. So a really horrid, frightening disease. We found the virus in the 90s, and they developed a vaccine for it. The vaccine, although I think it's been used or misused in other ways, primarily is to protect baby birds. So the idea of the vaccine is to be given to baby birds before they go into an environment where they might be exposed to the virus. So if you're a bird breeder and you've got a nice, clean, polyoma-free aviary, but your birds are going to go to a pet shop, someplace where they might find this mixed population of birds, especially still budgies who still carry polyoma commonly, that vaccine will stop them from dying of the disease. But most adult birds don't develop clinical illness with polyoma, so we don't normally treat birds with the vaccine over and over again, like you might vaccinate your dog for rabies, parvovirus, or distemper, or something like that. It's pretty much a baby bird disease, bird virus vaccine. The problem with polyoma, like with beak and feather disease, we'll get to that, is that although most bird breeders and most collections of birds have been test their expensive birds for the disease, that test probably costs anywhere from high 50s to low $70, depending on where you get it done and how far they have to mail it and things like that. If you own a cockatoo, it's probably been tested for beak and feather disease. But if you own a budgie or a lovebird or a cockatiel, it's probably never been tested for polyoma, and quite likely his parents and his grandparents and his great-grandparents have never been tested for it. So we still have this reservoir of birds who have polyoma, and the disease continues to rear its ugly head. So people who are new to breeding oftentimes get that welcome to breeding, your birds are dying of polyoma awakening. Oftentimes new pet shops have outbreaks of polyoma. most of those people learn the lesson pretty fast, because once you've experienced this horrible disease, you're usually much more careful where you buy your birds and who you mix your, especially baby birds, with. You'll notice that most bird stores that have baby birds in California, at least, you cannot sell a bird that's not weaned now. So the nurseries, if they have birds who are still being hand-fed in the pet shop, typically they're isolated. You can look at the birds through a window, but the only people who get to go in there are people who only have exposure to the baby birds. The people who work with the rest of the population in the pet shop don't go in the nursery. Same is true with also most big bird breeding places, and when they add new birds, well-run aviaries, if they add birds to their population, they're quarantined and tested before they get into the general population. So hopefully a disease that certainly is less prevalent than it was, hopefully it'll be gone someday. But what that takes is testing the less expensive birds, the birds where the bird doesn't cost as much as the test is. So personally, if you're going to bring a parakeet into your home and you have other birds, testing for polyoma is a responsible thing to do. What we'd really like to see is the big superstores, because they're still the big source for the less expensive birds. Cockatiels, lovebirds, parakeets, ringneck parakeets, some of those guys. Those organizations should require their suppliers test all their birds, that they have polyoma, beak and feather disease free populations, because they have the clout to do that. And they can get their suppliers to jump through hoops that the little neighborhood pet shop who sells birds cannot do. And they tell, big bird breeder, we're not going to buy your birds if they're not tested for Polyomavirus. Those big breeders are going to laugh at them. But if you have an account with Petco or PetSmart or some of these other huge superstores, they can certainly get those organizations to jump through the hoops and sell proven disease-free birds. That's really what the bird market, the bird community should press upon. Get them all tested. Next we have beak and feather disease. Beak and feather disease was a similarly devastating bird disease. You'd have birds who came out of the commercial quarantine stations. Commercial quarantine ran between 1975 and January 1st, 1990. It's the end of commercial quarantine. But birds would catch that disease or have that disease when they went into quarantine, and the birds who had it had a truly devastating disease. In old world birds like cockatoos and African greys, it would affect their feather follicles, their beaks, and some other skin tissues, and these birds would lose their feathers. They'd be naked. They would get skin sores, and their beaks literally would rot off. It was pretty nasty to watch. On top of that, beak and feather disease destroys an animal's B cells. So your immune system has two primary types of lymphocytes that help you deal with disease. You have T cells that come from this piece of tissue that's in your chest as an embryo, called your thymus, hence their T cells. And you have B cells that come from this little pocket in your cloaca. Even we have a cloaca embryologically. The birds have one clear up until the time of about weaning. And that this little fold of tissue is called a bursa of Fabricus, named after an anatomist named Fabricus, and B cells for bursa. So bursal cells and thymic cells. T cells help you with cellular immunity. They protect you from fungal diseases and cancer and a number of things like that. And if you have the AIDS virus, if you develop the disease of AIDS, what happens is that virus attacks your T cells, destroys your T cell immunities. Beak and feather disease that virus replicates in the bursa of young birds, and it infects and destroys their B cells. So your B cells are your lymphocytes that give you humoral immunity, the cells that make antibodies that protect you from diseases where antibodies stops them. So if we had a B cell immunity deficiency, you couldn't be protected from measles and chickenpox and TB and polio, all those things you get vaccinated for. You'd have no vaccine reaction, would make antibodies against those diseases. So again, it's a disease that starts with baby birds. You have to be exposed to it as babies, we think, to truly get the clinical disease. So keeping it away from birds who are in nurseries and in breeding situations is the important thing about stopping it. But along with that is the getting rid of it in the carrier birds, which once again are the parakeets, lovebirds, cockatiels, inexpensive birds where they're, the bird wholesales, or at least retails or wholesales, less than the cost of the test. We developed the test for beak and feather disease, also in the 90s, I believe. It's a good test. It's pretty accurate. Works. A lot of boarding facilities also require your bird be tested for beak and feather disease because they're worried about people taking it home and leading to young birds getting it. Some of that is waning because we see so little of it. I think in calendar year 2014 in my hospital, we only saw 3 cases of beak and feather disease. 2 cases were in small species. 1 was in a large species, but it was raised in a pet shop with a lot of lovebirds, cockatiels, and that's probably where it caught it. So we're not seeing nearly as much. Most of the same thing is true for those guys. The big pressure is to test everybody. If you want to make sure you buy your birds if you get them from places where the birds have been isolated and or tested. There is no vaccine for beak and feather disease. There's only a test for it. So prevention's the big aspect there. Next we have Cloaca Papilloma Disease, and this is a disease that we've also known about for a long time. It took them a while to find the virus that causes it because it acted like a virus. They were thinking that it was a papilloma viruses. So papilloma viruses cause skin tumors, what you'd call a wart or a papilloma, and this disease is very similar to that. It grows a papilloma-like warty growth in the inside of the vent of the bird, and it can be very devastating. It causes bleeding, and it causes scar tissue to develop in there when you treat it, and it's recurrent. It'll go away, but then when the bird gets stressed or if things just aren't going well with it, it'll show back up again. And it turns out that it's caused by not a papilloma virus, but a herpes virus. So it works like a cold sore or genital herpes, where if things aren't going perfect for you, it shows back up. Lives in your ganglia, hides in those little nerve nodes in your body, and when your immune system falters a little bit, it goes back down the nerve and it causes a lesion. In the bird's case, in their cloaca. The problem with it is that it's just relatively uncurable. The topical anti-herpes medication like you'd use for your cold sores don't seem to work on it very well. People have removed them surgically with sharp dissection, cutting them out, cauterized them, frozen them. That's what we tend to do in our hospital because I think it just causes less damage to the tissue because we know it's coming back. All sorts of things. Not treated them, just try to treat them symptomatically. But the inflammation and the damage from this warty growth causes scar tissue and constriction of vents so that the vent gets smaller, which makes it hard for the bird to pass stool. And we have to do surgery on the vent to try and make it bigger again. And they're tragic diseases because there's just no cure for them. So the diagnosis of that disease is made by biopsying the warty growths. There's no question we see less of this disease than we used to, but we still do see it. And part of it is I think there's no blood test or common clinical, like a DNA swab or something for this disease. And it's not considered real important, so a lot of birds aren't ever tested for it. There aren't, like I know of no boarding facility that requires a bird to be tested for it, I don't know any breeders who test for it. I think if they have those birds, they try to just get rid of them, and their problems go away. But it's a challenging disease for that. So it's a disease that we maintain. These birds are expensive to keep because a lot of them will have multiple trips to the veterinarian every year, oftentimes have some surgical procedure or some, that requires the bird be anesthetized and cauterized or frozen or treated in some fashion. They can get secondary bacterial infections, both because the tissue is damaged by the virus and because the birds who can't poop correctly, the bacteria grows in their urine and feces in their cloaca, and they get secondary bacterial infections from that, just because they can't empty their cloaca. What keeps you from getting, bladder infections and things like that is kind of the flowing stream versus stagnant pond philosophy. As long as your bladder fills and empties, or as long as your bird's cloaca fills and empties on a regular basis, just like a running stream, you don't get infections. But if that bacteria sits in there for hours and hours and hours, then the bacteria gets time to grow and can cause secondary infections. We see that in birds who become nesty or something. They want to sit for hours and hours and they don't get up and make droppings, or birds who refuse to go to the bathroom in their cage. Some of those guys will get secondary bacterial infections just from holding their droppings all night long or for long periods of time. So these birds have some of those same problems. So the treatment is to try and treat the lesions when they're there. Some of them we will still put on some antiviral, herpes viral medication. Those things are available over the counter. Other things to decrease the inflammation, like NSAIDs, meloxicam, Metacam, help a lot. Both they make the bird more comfortable and they reduce the inflammation caused by the lesion. And we just try to stay on top of them so they don't get too far behind. A lot of these birds eventually get put to sleep because they're just too expensive and their quality of life is not good. And the other strange thing about this disease is some of these birds, especially with chronicity, if they've had the disease for years and years, will show up with with actual tumors that we think are caused by the virus, at least. I don't know how well proven it is. But the common tumors that they get are bile duct adenocarcinomas and pancreatic adenocarcinomas. Those two tumors are very common in these birds, and they're about the only time we see those two tumors in parrots is birds who have them. And then rarely they'll get lesions, just like in their cloaca, in their oral cavity. So typically right around the rim of their glottis, those can grow big enough that they can't breathe and have to have surgery to be removed and things like that as well. So somewhat tragic disease, disappointing to have a bird that does it. Oh, by the way, those diseases I think can occur in all parrots, but they're much more common in New World birds. So Pyonis, Amazons, macaws, mini macaws. We see it in hawk-headed parrots. One of my own hawk-headed parrots died of pancreatic adenocarcinoma after having 7-8 years of cloacal papillomas.
If you are enjoying our videos, we hope that you can find it in your heart to support our work. It costs between $25,000 to $30,000 a year to care for our flock of heartbroken and abused birds. Most of our birds came with feather destructive disorder. Even a basic exam with blood work costs $300. Medical emergencies cost us thousands a year. We are a non-profit, and donations are tax-deductible to the full extent of the law. We need your support. Birds deserve a happy and healthy life. Become our patron at www.patreon.com/Chloe Sanctuary to support us on a per-video basis, or donate at our webpage today.
So I'd conclude the infectious disease section here with just the idea that you need to be aware of your bird's health, and you need to think about both how you keep and treat them and the environment that they're exposed to. So I would tell you that when you add new birds to your home, whether it's your first bird or your 20th bird, you want to make sure that bird comes from, or at least have to be aware of the environment that it comes from. It needs to go see a veterinarian and be tested for at least the most common of those diseases. I just think that that's wise, and that's part of the responsibility of owning that bird. It's not that I'm trying to build my practice. It's just irresponsible, I think, to bring unchecked, untested birds into your environment. And then you just need to have some level of regular monitoring, just like you'd go to the doctor periodically. At least have a doctor touch that bird, a veterinarian who knows what he's talking about, and preferably a board-certified avian veterinarian, but at least the most qualified person you can find. Touch that bird on a regular basis every year. We like to do some blood work on birds every 5 years in my practice. I think every year is probably more than most birds need, but we really like to at least get our hands on them so we can look at them, see what their skin looks like, see what their droppings look like, palpate them for lumps and bumps, look in their vent, look down their throat, make sure they don't have things that if we caught it early we could fix. New birds should be quarantined for a period of time. I say 30 days. Things happen pretty quick in birds. I don't think you have to quarantine them forever, but a period of quarantine before they go have direct contact with your other birds is wise. You want to take care of the established birds, the birds you've had for a long time first. Take care of the new birds last, so you don't take things from your new birds to your old birds. And then I'd say, put pressure on your bird community. Ask your bird store, do they test birds? Do they limit the birds they buy from birds who have tested closed flocks? Are they MAP certified? There's a certifying organization that gives a rubber stamp to a breeder whose birds are tested and isolated from new birds coming and going, called MAP. And those are all good. Put some pressure on those big superstores, to do the right thing with their birds. And that's going to be the end of our infectious diseases. We have such a close community of birds that the potential to get rid of all these diseases is there. And in my lifetime, it would be really neat if we saw a few more of them disappear. It's nice that we're only seeing maybe a tenth or less of what we saw prior to 1990.
We welcome your feedback on our videos. We look forward to your insights, tips, questions, stories, and pictures. You can email us at cockatoo@chloesanctuary.org, reach us on Twitter @Chloe Sanctuary, and join with us on our Facebook Chloe Sanctuary page. Please visit our website at www.chloesanctuary.org. That's Chloe spelled CHLOE. You can support us on a per-episode basis by visiting www.patreon.com, that's PATREON, /Chloe Sanctuary.